It's a pleasure for me to introduce our speaker today, who's going to talk to us about using tarot cards for our spiritual development. We live in a world obsessed with competition and material gain, but we're here today to learn how to use tarot cards to go to a deeper level. And our speaker, Chrissy La Vielle here, is an expert on this topic. As a practicing witch since her initiation in Great Britain back in 1972, she's taught for several years intensives in witchcraft, magic, and herbalism, and also her years of experience as a tarot reader. Her wisdom and insight into the tarot are no doubt a reflection of her diverse life experience. She has a botany degree and a lifelong interest in science. She's a mother of twin sons and a grandmother. And she's also an excellent writer. Her latest work is a trilogy, the Mage Web Series. You should check out her first novel in particular, which is Forging the Blade. Her heroine encounters each of the major arcana cards, and it becomes a story, and it will stick in your mind for good. So I highly recommend that. So here's Chrissy La Vielle. Welcome, Chrissy.
Thank you, Kathy. You always sound so good when someone introduces you. So, and happy belting. It's May Day. Oh, yes. So anyway, I'm here to talk today about tarot as a tool for spiritual development. And when Kathy told me the Theosophical Society was looking for someone to talk about how tarot could help you in your daily life, and asked me to call Ron and volunteer, I almost said no. What could I possibly say to a bunch of folks who either already know about how tarot can help them in their daily lives, or already have active and rewarding spiritual practices that don't include tarot? What would be the point? And then I thought, well, why shouldn't I? I love geeking out over tarot, and dealing with the cards is always a rewarding experience. I always discover something new. So here I am, and hopefully I will have a few ideas or bits of information for those of you already familiar with the cards. And perhaps I will convince some of the rest of you to study them. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, let's define our terms. Okay, so is everybody seeing the shared screen? Great. First, what is a tarot deck? A tarot deck consists of two parts. The major arcana made up of 40 number or pip cards and 16 court cards, and the major arcana made up of 22 numbered picture cards. If a deck doesn't have both major and minor arcana, it's not a tarot deck. If it has just the pips and court cards, it's probably a playing card deck. If it's just a series of numbered or unnumbered cards like the major arcana, it's either an oracle deck or a Lenormand deck. All of the above are perfectly fine for doing readings, but they're not tarot decks. The 22 major arcana cards are pictures numbered 0 through 21 and packed with symbolism. Each card describes a force or intelligence at work in the universe. Together, they are a guide to spiritual enlightenment. They will be the focus of this presentation, or at least several of them will be. We don't have time to cover all of them. There are literally hundreds of different tarot decks out there. Some of them have amazing art, and some of them, like the Housewives Tarot, are funny and clever. But, oops. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck I'm trying to use the cursor. Can you see the cursor? Huh? Okay. This is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And most of the tarot decks out there are derived from that deck. Let's see. When I first started reading cards back in the 70s, this was practically the only deck I could find. So this is the one I learned on. It was created by Golden Dawn members Arthur Edward Waite and artist Pamela Coleman Smith. They borrowed heavily from the work of Eliphas Levi and the Marseille decks that were popular on the continent at the time, and they're still used a lot today. It was first published in 1910, and I will be using the Major Arcana for this deck. I will also be using examples from the Builders of the Addendum deck. It's almost identical to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, except the pit cards are just, they don't have the beautiful pictures that the Rider-Waite-Smith deck does. And there are some very slight differences, which you'll see through the talk. It was created several years after the Rider-Waite-Smith deck by Paul Foster Case, the founder of BOTA, and the artist Jesse Burns. So, how does studying or using this deck of cards help you in your daily life? Of course, having your cards read gives you a fresh perspective on your problem or situation and helps you deal with it more effectively. And it may also tell you your probable future. Having your cards read is wonderful, but not nearly as valuable as seriously studying them and learning to read them yourself. In my experience, this process will help you tap into spirit. So I need to start by explaining what I mean by spirit. I'll be using the word in its broadest sense. Spirit is anything that exists outside of the material realm, the everyday world, the world of jobs, appointments, relationships, finances, desires, and joys and sorrows. The divine one, the force, all the gods and goddesses, and demons and jinns and fairies and elementals and bodhisattvas. These are all names we give to what I'll be calling spirit. So I'm just making it simple. The next question is, what are the rewards of tapping into spirit? Why should I even bother? I have found that the rewards are many, and they are also very well documented. Inner peace, joy, improved mental and physical performance, improved ability to deal with stress, improved health. It also allows you to reframe the everyday world and view it from a higher perspective, which makes it much easier to navigate. Well, that's lovely, you say, but how do you tap into spirit? Oh, let me count the ways. Working with tarot is one way, but there is also meditation, prayer, travel to sacred places, ritual, or drugs like LSD or DMT. But you all know it's not simple. That's why we call it a spiritual practice, and it's the practice of a lifetime. So now we're back to how can a deck of tarot cards make my life richer and more spiritually rewarding? A tarot deck is an interactive book full of information about how the multiverse works and how to tap into it and how to find spirit. And since it's a picture book, it works differently than a book with sentences. A picture is worth 1,000 words, at least 1,000 words, and especially when it's an archetypal symbol that speaks directly to your subconscious mind, and especially when it's combined with lots of other symbols in each card. Let's see, it's interactive because each card reads differently depending on which cards you pull from the deck, what order you pull them in, and what you're thinking about at the time, or what you or the person you're reading for wants to know. With all these variables, the information in that one little book becomes practically endless. All you need to do is learn the language it's written in, the language of symbols, archetypes, and the subconscious. The purpose of this presentation is to show you how to begin to read that book. It's as easy as ABC and 1, 2, 3. Let's start with A. This is a divine fool, filled with wonder, enthusiasm, and infinite possibility. The key's number is 0, the cosmic egg, the no thing that contains letter is Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's one of the 3 mother letters and is attributed to air. The letter itself means ox, an ancient symbol of vital life force. The mountains stand for abstract thought, which is the basis for all physical expression, and the white rose is a symbol of innocence and purity. Yellow background color denotes air, vital force, and conscious thought. Conscious thought. The fool is the seeker, neither male nor female, but anyone and everyone who seeks to understand the mysteries of the multiverse. The card itself suggests that this will be a long journey because the fool's in the middle of nowhere and carrying a staff and a bag. The white rose in the fool's posture suggests an open heart and mind. There's a lot more to understand in this key. What about the dog? Why is the sun white? What's in the bag? Etc. But for this particular presentation, it's enough to understand that the fool is an innocent, rational, open-minded, conscious seeker. But the figure's quest seems foolish and impossible. Because how can you find something that you can't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell? How can you do that? To help the seeker, and that would be each and every one of us, the next 3 cards give us some hints. The magician stands in a garden of white lilies and red roses, symbols of purity and of passion. His right hand is raised and holds a double-ended wand. The left points toward the garden. His number is 1, unity and concentration. The key is attributed to Mercury, the planet of logic, conscious thought, and communication. Sword, cup, wand, and disc, symbols for the 4 elements, air, water, fire, and earth, respectively, rest on the table beside him. He's using the life force, or the full force of his will, to direct energy or thought down and focusing it into the garden with his left hand. The second card is the High Priestess. Her outer robe and the background of this card are blue, the color of water and the subconscious. And to further underline, this is the card of the subconscious. She wears a crown made up with a full moon bracketed by the waxing and waning lunar crescents, also symbols of the subconscious. Her number is 2, the number of duality. It is also the number of reflection. The subconscious receives ideas, impressions, and emotions from the conscious mind, compares and aligns them with a vast amount of information that's already in it, files it away, and reflects its modified version back into the conscious mind. And just as our subconsciousness is hidden away somewhere deep within us, the High Priestess is hidden inside a temple. She sits between a black pillar and a white pillar and in front of a curtain decorated with pomegranates and palm trees. This is the gate between the subconscious and spirit, okay? Card number 3 is the Empress. The card on the left is a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and on the right is the BOTA deck. Unlike the high priestess, the empress sits out in the open, in a garden surrounded by light and life and growing things. This card is the epitome of abundance and happiness. She's the manifestation of the magician's desire. But notice the stream that waters her garden and the crescent moon beneath her feet in the Boda card. Where do you think the resources and creativity that built that garden came from? So here you have it, your first tarot spread, okay? And the question is, how do I tap into spirit? Reading the cards from left to right, just like a sentence, we start with the magician, who is all about consciously focusing or willing your desire to come about. In this case, it's the desire to tap into spirit. Aleister Crowley, one of the most infamous magicians of all time, defined magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. A key concept here is will or desire. Just thinking it would be nice to have, or maybe a good idea, isn't enough. It's not nearly enough. You have to be really, really wanting it. You have to want it at a deep level of your being. You must be passionate about it. This is all good and well, but exactly where are you going to focus all that willpower and passion? The magician is giving us a not so subtle hint. Look where he's pointing. He's not pointing at his altar, which holds the symbols of the material world. He's pointing down into the garden. And a garden is a metaphor for the subconscious, the high priestess. Sigmund Freud once said, the mind is like an iceberg with 1/7 of its bulk above the water. That 1/7 part corresponds to our conscious mind. It's the part of our mind we use to navigate and control our everyday lives. It's where we live almost all the time, except for maybe when we're sleeping, with no thought to our vast subconscious that lies under the surface of those thoughts. It's ruled by the high priestess, and she sits in front of that pomegranate and palm tree curtain. Now, the $1 million question is, what's behind that curtain? If we take our iceberg simile a step farther, we can say that the entire vast ocean is what's behind that curtain. And to carry the analogy a step further, that iceberg is made of the same thing as the ocean, water crystallized into ice. So both our conscious and subconscious minds are actually spirit, only crystallized into a different form. Holy men and philosophers have been trying to tell us their version of what's behind the curtain and what makes up that ocean for as long as there have been human beings. Psychiatrist Richard Maurice Buck described it as a cosmic consciousness, a higher form of consciousness than that possessed by ordinary man. Carl Jung described it as the collective unconscious, the shared psyche of the entire human race, which contains all the primordial images or archetypes and all the knowledge that ever was or ever will be. 19th century mystics called it ether. Luke Skywalker called it the Force. A magician would call it magic. A Christian would call it God. For this presentation, I will call it spirit or the divine. Okay? For all we know, all these ideas are correct. But we'll never know for sure because it's behind the curtain. We may see it move the curtain or glimpse tiny parts of it, but we can never, ever see it in its entirety. Remember the poem, The Blind Man and the Elephant? To throw in yet another analogy, the thing behind the curtain is the elephant. It's hidden from us and too vast for the human mind to even begin to comprehend, even if we could see it. But each of us is capable of communing with tiny parts of it. Unfortunately, none of us grabs exactly the same part. We can try. We can, as a group, invoke the same gods or goddesses or God or whatever. But in my experience, one person's perception of that deity will be totally different from anybody else's. Connecting with spirit is a very personal thing. Only you can know what it says to you, what it does for you, and how it makes you feel. So for the purpose of this presentation, let us assume that the elephant exists and that we are all capable of connecting with parts of it and learning from it in our own individual ways. So the magician focuses and sends his question or desire into his subconscious, or the high priestess, who rummages around through her files to find the answer. Or if it's not there, she goes to spirit or the elephant for the solution. The empress, the creative intelligence which transforms spirit into matter and or conscious thought, takes that desire or question and literally moves heaven and earth to provide the magician's conscious mind with an answer or to actually manifest a result. Intentionally or unintentionally, your conscious mind is in constant communication with your unconscious mind, which records and remembers every conscious thought, emotion, and experience you have. It doesn't matter if it's negative or positive, it still becomes part of your subconscious. It constantly reacts and responds to these new thoughts, emotions, and experiences by mirroring its own modified version of them back into your conscious mind. So when we consciously react to these thoughts, emotions, and experiences, it's really a reaction to your subconscious's interpretation of them, not the actual thought, emotion, or experience. Our subconscious is the lens through which we perceive our world. So it's really the interpreter. So two people could see the same thing and they would actually see maybe slightly different things. Okay. The attribution on this is not right. I'm sorry. It's actually a part of a poem by the Argentinian poet George Luis Borges. So getting back to the magician in his garden as a metaphor for the subconscious. Jack Kornfield, a Buddhist monk and one of the pioneers who brought Buddhist philosophy to the US in the 60s and 70s, once said, "Spiritual life is a lot like gardening. We till and cultivate the garden of our heart, planting seeds of presence, openness, and the ability to respect whatever arises. We water each one of the things which are beautiful. We water each one so the things within us which are beautiful can blossom." So the first step in connecting with spirit should be to continually feed your subconscious positive and spiritually uplifting thoughts, acts of kindness, and things of beauty. If a persistent thought doesn't bring you joy and support, either correct the situation that caused it or get rid of it. It's a weed. This isn't easy. It's really not easy. especially since your subconscious, the thing you're trying to change, has so much influence on your conscious mind, the thing you're trying to change it with. It's a catch-22, right? It could take many years of this practice before your subconscious begins mirroring back the good stuff. A reasonably happy subconscious makes connecting with spirit much easier. It also makes it much safer. Because like always attracts like, and there are sharks swimming in the waters of the ocean. The tarot card that speaks of this practice is Strength. A young woman with an infinity symbol over her head gently caresses a huge lion who looks up at her adoringly. Around her waist is a belt of red roses and what might be white lilies, which he's draped loosely over the lion's mane. The background of the card is yellow, the color of logic and communication. Oh. It happened. I don't want to chat.
Just click anywhere.
There you go. Now it's not turning. It's not. You are screen sharing. Yeah, I know that. There we go. Okay. The infinity symbol, roses and lilies and yellow background are strongly reminiscent of the magician, who symbolizes the conscious mind focused on a specific purpose. The woman is focusing this purpose on a lion, and the magician is focusing it on a garden. Garden is a metaphor for the subconscious, and so is the lion. Except the lion is our vast, powerful subconscious at its wildest and meanest. It sends us terrors in the middle of the night and wrecks our relationships. It convinces us that we are worthless failures. It's all our nasty bits and pieces that we hide away like a crazy ant in the attic. The woman is using her focused, unconscious will to subdue and retrain her feral subconscious, turning it into a powerful ally instead of an enemy. But she's not using stern commands or force. She's using love and kindness. A difficult and totally dangerous task. That's a huge lion. And he's got teeth and claws and he knows how to use them. This image should come with a warning. Don't try this at home, kids. Unfortunately, most of us do just that, with no help or protection. And we achieve varying degrees of success, depending on our karma and how much trauma and abuse we've suffered in this life. A safer, more practical approach would be to work with a psychotherapist, or at least with a knowledgeable support group. Once you are on at least civil terms with your subconscious, the rest of the work involves regular conscious communication with your subconscious, and so does spirit. The tarot is a perfect tool for this sort of work. You can play with a full deck or not. No, you can use the full deck or just the majors. The first step is to relax. Some people find that lighting a candle and watching the flame helps. Some focus on their breath, whatever you do. When you're ready, ask a question and choose a card at random. Or choose a card without the question and leave the reply up to spirit. Or decide for yourself which card you want to meditate on and ask for guidance. Sometimes the reply is obvious, and sometimes you'll need to take some time to meditate on a card. The trick is to recognize it and believe that it's a reply and not your imagination or wishful thinking. It took me years to get to the point where I could ask the question and usually get a clear-cut answer. The point of this practice, however, is not just to get answers. This practice develops your ability to reach out and commune with spirit. When I first began reading tarot, many spreads were totally confusing and uninformative. I thought at the time that I just didn't know enough to figure out what they were saying. But over the years, as my readings got clearer and more meaningful, I began to realize that not understanding the cards wasn't the only reason why I'd been having trouble. In fact, it was only a small part of the problem. The real problem was that I wasn't proficient enough in connecting with spirit. I hadn't assimilated the magician, high priestess, empress sequence. A tarot reader must connect with the querent and their question and consciously send that question wrapped in the querent's need to know, and that's the magician, into their subconscious, the high priestess, which sends it to spirit, which then sends us an answer, and that's the empress. With tarot, the answers from spirit come in two forms. The first is the cards that turn up in the layout. And the second is the information spirit gives to the reader about those cards. Listening to spirit has become familiar and comfortable to me. But I never cease to be thrilled and amazed when, against all odds, the cards that I deal off the top of the deck tell a coherent and helpful story, which according to the querent is just what they needed to hear. A small miracle that reassures me that the Empress is out there and pulling strings for me and anyone else who asks. But you have to ask. There are two major arcana cards which speak to this process of feeding and nurturing your subconscious in order to commune with spirit. The Hermit stands on a cliff. From the look of the card, there's no one else for miles and miles. He holds up a lamp so others below can see him, but he himself remains aloof and alone. When someone looks at this card, this archetypal image of the wise old man triggers their subconscious, and it begins sending ideas into their conscious mind. Whether these ideas are useful or not depends on how well that person has programmed their subconscious. The worst case scenario would simply be a moment of panic if the person was afraid of heights. Not really useful. But most likely they would have sent enough information and ideas into their subconscious for it to start sending them feelings of loneliness, isolation, speculations about how this might be a learned holy man, etc., etc. If they had studied religious and mystical symbolism, they would notice that the star lighting the hermit's lantern has 6 points. And 6-pointed stars are composed of 2 triangles, one facing up and one down, the alchemical symbols of fire and water, respectively, or conscious and subconscious. A 6-pointed star depicts the union of conscious and subconscious. It has an alchemical meaning of as above, so below. If this person had also made a careful study of Rider-Waite-Smith deck and astrology, they would know that the Hermit is attributed to Virgo, the sign of self-improvement. And the sign of Virgo is ruled by Mercury, the planet of logic, communication, and conscious thought. And Mercury is attributed to the magician. Even more data for the subconscious to chew on. And after a bit, it might suggest to them another meaning of the card. Taking the time to be alone, all by ourselves, studying things that we are passionate about, practicing what we've learned, and meditating is a good way to feed and nurture the subconscious, which will connect you to spirit. These are the lessons of the Hermit card. I know you wanted me to give you something easy, didn't you? Let's see. The second card is Temperance. The Rider-Waite-Smith Temperance shows an angel pouring water from one chalice to another. One foot is on land and the other is on the water. This indicates communion between the conscious and subconscious. But that's an angel that's doing the pouring. And it's not just any angel, it's the Archangel Michael. We know this because of the upward pointing red triangle over his heart. And that triangle is really red, it's not orange. Okay, so it's supposed to be red. And he's solar because you can see the sun symbol on his forehead. And he has Kabbalistic associations with Tipra and the heart. This card is about introducing spirit into your dialogue between the conscious and the subconscious. When you're able to do this, amazing things happen. Life gets much easier and brighter, and things miraculously come together in unexpected yet perfect ways. Of course, this doesn't happen all the time, but it's wonderful when you can achieve it. This card is also about actively and rationally experimenting and seeking to verify your ideas and assumptions about spirit and your spiritual practice. Let's see. Archangel Michael is also the one with a sword, as you remember. He uses it not only as a weapon, but as a tool of discrimination. As a symbol of air and logic, it divides issues into this but not that pieces, and it cuts to the heart of a problem. Belief has nothing to do with this process. In fact, blind faith is detrimental. But so is disbelief. As a baby witch, my teacher stressed that I shouldn't blindly believe in the magic I was working, but instead, I should suspend disbelief. I didn't understand back then how important that distinction was, but it's a huge distinction. So you should ask yourself, is what I'm doing working? Does it bring me joy? Are the answers I receive helpful? As I continue along this path, am I becoming spiritually stronger? The answers are no, try something else. I mean, you don't have to ditch everything you did before, but try something else, Fluff it up, do something different. But keep trying. There are countless paths to spirit, and different things work for different people. But spirit will eventually answer. In fact, it's been answering you all along. You just haven't been able to get out of the way of yourself and hear it. If you do as the Hermit and Temperance suggest, what you will gain is far more precious than belief. You will know for certain in your heart that the path you have chosen is correct, and that spirit does indeed exist and is totally on your side. You will also be able to reach out to spirit for guidance and assistance. You will have mastered the Magician, High Priestess, Empress. You will be able to do magic. The Emperor, card number 4, follows the Empress. The Emperor is ruled by Aries the Ram, which is an assertive, active, pioneering, getting things done sort of sign. He takes the bounty provided by the Empress and figures out what to do with it and how to get more of it. In our tarot reading analogy, the reader receives the answer from the cards, which is the Empress, and decides what to tell the querent, which is the Emperor. Lots of information comes through in a spread. The cards, and especially the major arcana, are like ogres and onions. They have layers, from spiritually abstract to very, very practical. How much of this information does the client want to know? And what shouldn't they know? I did a reading for a friend and death came up in his future position. Its esoteric meaning is that everything that ever is or will be has grown from the bodies, minds, and creativity of those who have gone before. Without death, there is no life. A less esoteric meaning is a loss that will transform you. A very literal translation is you or someone you know is going to die. Okay. As I laid down the death card, I knew that someone close to my friend was going to die. This is where the Emperor took over from the Empress. Should I tell my friend that someone he loved, I didn't know who, was going to die? Would it help him to know this? I didn't think so. Instead, I told my friend that there would be a drastic change in his life that would transform him. And a few weeks later, his father died. The Hierophant, card number 5, follows the Emperor. This card is ruled by Taurus, a practical sign that rules the ears, nose, and throat. Again, there are many layers of meaning to the Hierophant, but one of them is listen to what Spirit has to tell you, and if it's appropriate, tell others. As I have said before, you have to listen carefully. Spirit speaks softly. Well, at least it usually does. I remember Daddy came to see me one day with his spirit, which wasn't unusual because he checks in pretty often. And I said, "Hi, Daddy, what's happening?" And he yelled. I mean, it was like blasting in my ears. He said, "Get your money out of the goddamn bank." I said, okay. So we took everything out except checking accounts and a tiny savings account. And it was the best financial advice I'd ever gotten. But it blasted through. So sometimes it's not so quiet, but it usually is pretty quiet. Which brings us to card number 6, the Lovers, which is the recapitulation of all the cards before it. The esoteric message is very clear. The conscious mind, the man, must look to the subconscious, the woman, for spiritual guidance, the angel. A more practical interpretation of this card is choices. The key indicates that we have free will and can influence the way our lives turn out by the choices we make. It further suggests that we should listen to Spirit if we want to make good choices. This theme of 1, 2, 3, conscious, subconscious, spirit, or thesis, antithesis, and synthesis is a common theme in the design of many of the major arcana. We saw it first in the High Priestess. It shows up again in the Hierophant and now the Lovers. We also see it in ourselves. We are bipolar beings. We have a right side and a left side, right and left hands, arms, feet, legs, eyes, lungs, kidneys, all connected to a central core. We have 2 genders, of course, with varying possibilities in between. We have a right brain and a left brain. The left brain, which controls our right side, handles reading, writing, calculations, etc. Some call it the logical side of the brain. The right brain, which controls our left side, is more visual and deals more with images rather than words. It processes information in an intuitive and simultaneous manner, the way the subconscious does. They're connected by the corpus callosum, a band of nerve tissue that integrates the information collected by the two halves. You see the corpus callosum there, that stringy white stuff. Okay. The pattern of these two halves plus one is hardwired into us. 3 is a charm, we say, or things come in threes. For instance, on a visit to the Apple store downtown, I watched one of their videos on photography while I was waiting to be helped. It suggested dividing the picture you're composing into 3 horizontal or vertical bands to get the most pleasing result. Another 3. People like 3s. In other words, we perceive the world in sets of 3, and the tarot mirrors that back to us to intensify and clarify the meaning of the cards. The Rider-Waite-Smith and Bodedex use this pattern of 3 to describe the path to enlightenment. The Lover shows the way the psyche needs to function to commune with spirit. The Devil shows the way to short circuit that path. The devil, or Satan, has a place in all 3 monotheistic religions. In Judaism, he is known as the tempter, or adversary. In Christianity and Islam, he is the fallen angel and lord of the material realm. He appeared to Jesus in the desert and promised him all the kingdoms of humanity if Jesus would only bow down and worship him. His entire reason for being is to convince humanity that the material world is the only reality that exists. Or failing that, to tempt us away from pursuing a spiritual path by offering us all the wonderful diversions of our beautiful world. Now, I'm all for healthy pleasures, and beauty can be ever so spiritually inspiring. And we do need to eat and keep a roof over our heads, and comfy is nice. We must, as the saying goes, give the devil his due. But there comes a point, if we're not careful, when pleasures become addictions, desires that can never be fulfilled, and we are never content. Once you have reached this point, you are in the devil's power, trapped in the material world, right where he wants you, which is the plight of the 2 figures in the devil card. The man is trying to reason with the woman, who is staring blankly ahead and not hearing a word of it. Does this sound familiar to you? A perfect depiction of the subconscious mind isolated from both spirit and the superconscious, or the spirit and the conscious mind. We spend most of our working lives in this state because we live in the material world, the devil's playground. Unfortunately, as those who study the mind and all its mysteries are quick to point out, it's not healthy for us to be out of touch with our subconsciouses for too long. But fortunately, those chains the figures are wearing look easy to take off. The devil is the father of lies. Much as he would like us to believe it, those chains are an illusion, as is the rest of the material world. Remember the High Priestess card? It's the elephant behind the curtain that's the reality. Everything in front is what the Buddhists and Hindus call Maya, or illusion. And we need to spend more time in that true reality of spirit. It feeds us and brings us joy, health, and inner peace. This is the true meaning of the devil card. So now let's continue a few cards past the devil to the moon and see how the tarot points the way towards communion with spirit. Oops. Here. A shellfish begins a long journey on a path that leads to the moon. Again, we see the pattern of 3, except here there are at least 3 patterns of 3. See if you can find them. The moon is, of course, related to the high priestess, whose planet is the moon, and whose robes flow into the moon card to fill the pool from which the shellfish is emerging. And like the high priestess, this card is about the subconscious. To be more specific, it's about creating a rapport between the conscious and the subconscious, or in order to access spirit. In other words, this card is about spiritual evolution. The shellfish is a symbol of a spiritually unevolved mind, and the path outlines its journey to superconsciousness or enlightenment, symbolized by the moon. Except this is not your everyday run-of-the-mill moon. If you notice, it's got those little pointy things all around it, solar rays, which makes it a fusion of moon and sun, a symbol of superconsciousness. The path is difficult with twists and turns and ups and downs. On the way, the shellfish passes between a dog and a wolf. The wolf is untamed nature, and the dog is a product of our conscious influence or desire upon that nature to create something new. Nature versus art. Again, subconscious versus conscious. The image is telling us that to stay on the path toward spirit, we must tread the line between living in our conscious minds and our unconscious minds. The conscious mind can make no progress without the subconscious, because the subconscious is what knows spirit. And if you can't contact, you're lost. But the subconscious needs rational input from the conscious mind so it can receive proper guidance from spirit. It's a loop. We must be comfortable in both and allow them to speak to each other. The 2 towers are reminiscent of the 2 pillars behind the high priestess. Only in the moon, there's no veil between them. There's nothing to stop the shellfish from going past the pillars into spirit, but only if it stays on the path. And of course, there are no guarantees, but it will find when it goes into spirit. Also notice all those tiny blips raining down from the moon. Each one is the Hebrew letter Yod, which means spirit, or that tiny speck in which all the energy of creation is concentrated. And the moon is looking down at the shellfish. The message of the moon is obvious. Once you begin strengthening communication between the conscious mind and the subconscious and calling to spirit, spirit will answer. It will help you and guide you. It will align with your personal spirit and gently, or sometimes not so gently, nudge it into sync with the divine, gradually transforming it into higher and higher levels of consciousness. You don't have to trudge that path alone. You will have all the help you need. And spirit is very patient. No matter how many times you screw up, it will still be there, waiting to help you. It sounds incredible, but this has indeed been my experience. Which brings us to the next card in the sequence, the sun, the source of all life and light, shines above a dancing boy and girl, symbols of the subconscious and conscious minds. They're holding hands and looking at each other, which is different from what we've seen before. And they are naked. I can't think of a better way to convey the idea that the conscious and subconscious minds are in direct communication and have no secrets or mysteries between them. And when this is the case, they are also in communion with spirit, and all things are possible. Just look at all those, and just look at those nice juicy yods raining down on them. This is the Boda version of the sun card. The card on the right with the boy on the horse is the Rider-Waite-Smith version of the sun. It says pretty much the same thing, but with different imagery. But notice that in both of these cards, and with all the other preceding groups of three, the figures' backs are to spirit. Which brings us to key 20, judgment. Notice that all the figures are facing the angel or spirit, except now there are three, the man, woman, and a child. The child is the evolved conscious, formed by the union of conscious and subconscious, the product of their perfect communion. They are in constant, intimate communication with spirit, and so have transcended the material realm. An androgyne, the perfect, complete union of masculine and feminine, positive and negative, conscious and subconscious, dances effortlessly suspended in time and space and surrounded by a laurel wreath of victory. At the four corners are the symbols of the four fixed signs of the zodiac and the four elements. The bull is Taurus, earth, the lion is Leo, fire, the eagle is Scorpio, water, and the man is Aquarius, air. The square and the four elements represent the material world. But there's a circle inside of it, a symbol of spirit. The dancer dances within a squared circle. Squaring the circle is a mathematically impossible geometry problem. But it's also a metaphor for the universal human problem of harmoniously uniting heaven and earth, spirit and matter, conscious and subconscious. Alchemists have always maintained that the perfect union of masculine and feminine ensures our perfect communion with spirit, or the divine, which squares the circle. Notice the man and the woman, conscious and subconscious, united within that circle. They have transcended the material realm. And once you have transcended the material realm, you have the world. In fact, all the worlds of the multiverse at your fingertips. Because, to quote the title of a great movie, you are everything, everywhere, and all at once. Actually, we have always been everything, everywhere, and all at once. Our conscious minds just can't wrap themselves around that reality yet. Whoops. In other words, the tarot teaches us that our true purpose in life is to allow spirit to transform our bodies and minds, both conscious and subconscious, into a receptacle in which spirit can dance. That's it. So